why we wanted to create the space for this conversation is because we're not afraid of AI, actually, at all. That's not how we see it. We think that it's, we think about things like the printing press. We think about things like the Industrial Revolution. We think about things like, great discoveries in the history of the world. And I think we want to do that within the context of ethics, in the context of thinking about our planet, in the context of thinking about innovation, wealth creation, job creation. That's how we want to think about this. I'm not saying there are not dangers. That's not what I'm saying. It's just not the tone that we're going to come at this from. We're going to talk about the fact that anytime you create something good, there is a dark side to it. That's just the way the world works, right? Like, it's both true personally and it's true organizationally, and it's true with any invention or innovation that you come up with. I can tell you this, the people that you're gonna hear from today are thinking about how to both maximize the opportunities that are presented with AI, as well as solve for whatever problems might come as we seize those opportunities, all right? So thank you for being here. The purpose of these conversations is actually to kick off something that will culminate in Rome later this year, where we're gonna actually really bring together some leaders at the Vatican to talk about this at a high level. Our good friend here, Emerson Farrell, who you're gonna hear from, and his company, Zeus and James, they're really kind of spearheading this and actually creating that space. There'll be a mini summit halfway through. I'm gonna let Bob talk more about it, but this isn't just a conversation at Davos. This is pulling together a community of practice to begin thinking about how we do this differently and bring this thing to life in a way that dynamically transforms not just our ability to create wealth, but our ability to take care of each other. With that, Bob, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. As JR mentioned, this is almost the emulation of what we really like to do at Handshake, which is work with our clients to ensure that Davos just isn't 4 days in Switzerland, that it leads to something that really catalyzes a movement or an idea over time that makes the world better. So, as JR alluded to, today is the first step in a journey towards what are called the Borgo Dialogues, which will take place in June, as JR mentioned. Those dialogues are sponsored by the Vatican, and you had met Cardinal Baggio, who had been here earlier this week. And he is leading that effort. And the purpose of that effort is to essentially infuse our faith, our humanity, our moral compass into the decisions shaping the global economy going forward. It's the time to bring together leaders from all over the world, all over the global economy, and allow them to sit and reflect and think about how we want the next generation of the economy, the next generation of society to unfold. Between now and June, we will hold a series of virtual listening sessions. We would love all of you here and people in your networks to be part of those listening sessions. Those will all be virtual. And those will be co-hosted by us and the Vatican. As JR mentioned, in April, there'll be kind of a key meeting point that will then really start to frame up what was talked about in the virtual sessions, and then think about how that applies to the agenda for the Borgo Dialogues. What you hear today, and a lot of the pillars of the conversations today, are going to set the stage for those conversations and the work of the Borgo Dialogues going forward. And again, it really is this is not about regulating AI. This is not about making AI go away. This is about how we can take the best of AI and take the best of what makes us as human beings and ensure that we have a system going forward that really helps catalyze society for the good of all. So with all of that, oh, and by the way, I should mention, if you are interested in being part of those listening sessions, please send an email to ai@handshake.co. And give us a little time to get that up and running, but we'll be in touch. So again, if you're interested, if there are people in your network that you think are interested in coming on this journey with us, please let us know. And please reach out to that email. So, Randall and our first panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Let's bring the panelists up, but I'm excited, first of all, this is my new favorite space in Davos, right? I mean, I feel like we're talking about humanity. I feel like we're in a beautiful church or house of worship here. It's something to really, it gives perspective. But come on up. I think a lot of people, not here, but when we all go back to civilization, we all know that we all have people in whatever organization you're in that are waiting for things to go back to normal. And this room understands that, and we have to kind of lean into it. But obviously, things are not going back to normal, quote unquote. AI is here to stay. There is no doubt. It's just accelerating. It's going to change everything. It's already changed everything. The rate of acceleration, and for perspective, for those who don't know me, I'm the chief content officer at Forbes, and we have 200 journalists who are just looking all day at, we basically have dictated to everybody on our staff that we don't have an AI beat reporter at Forbes. They're all AI beat reporters. Like, if you have two people, it's like, oh, you're covering AI and you're covering energy and you're covering every industry, every field is being completely disrupted. So we have the entire team looking at it that way. I think all of us have to think that way. But I think what's fun about today and these panels we have is to talk about which path we're going on. Will we be working for the machines, or will the machines be serving us? That's, of course, the question of our time. And we have a great panel to talk about it. And I'm gonna go in maybe I'll go in alphabetical order for intros, and that would mean that Dr. Cummings, Renee starts. I'll have each of you introduce yourself, and rather even than just your bio, would be also to kind of talk about your bio in the context of why you're here.
Well, thank you so.
AI would have done that automatically. Give it next year. You won't have to worry about that.
Well, thank you so very much for inviting me and including my voice in the conversation. I am Renee Cummings. I'm a criminologist and criminal psychologist by training. I'm also a professor of practice of data science at the School of Data Science at the University of Virginia. I have spent probably the last 15 years investigating algorithms. The criminal justice system in the US has been using algorithms for over 3 decades. That's how our criminal justice system has been serving sentences, looking at questions around parole, questions around pretrial sentencing. That is the work that brought me to the space of AI. And much of my work in teaching AI and teaching AI ethics, and of course working in the corporate space as well, really looks at how we can get the best out of this technology, looking at ways in which we can enhance duty of care, looking at ways in which we can build dignity and build justice into our algorithms, looking at ways that we could ensure that this technology is not only fair and equitable, but we still retain some measure of autonomy and agency when it comes to using the technology, and ensuring that everything that we do around this technology does not erase the diversity of voices, the diversity of experiences, and in everything that we try to build, we stand up not only representation, but certainly responsibility. So that is the work that I do on a daily basis.
Right down the line, yep.
Thank you as well for inviting me. It's exciting to be here. My first time at the World Economic Forum. Also studied psychology, so a bit of a background in there, but since then did a number of startups and spent time having exited some of those startups at companies like Adobe and Deloitte, ran a reasonably big chunk of Deloitte globally for a while. And got to see transformation at scale that was very successful, but was also very slow and not particularly agile. The company I'm now running, which I'm founder of, is called Quantum Rise. And we really take some of that maturity of approach, combine it with the tech in a very hybrid manner. And our tagline is human plus machine, because we deeply believe that that is the future. Not only do we believe that it is, but also that it should be. And I think we'll talk a lot in this panel about how machines are still in service of us, not the other way around. And so we help our clients on that journey, because they are all at some existential level of fear. How do we relax that and say, how do we get the machines to do...
Is it fear or is it panic?
We often panic, yes. So yeah, that's me. Great to be here, based in Chicago, despite my accent, and nice to see you all.
Lou, yes.
For having me. So I'm Lou. I'm the founder, managing partner of Fusion Fund. So I'm a venture capitalist. In the past 10, 11 years, so we started in 2015, we've been investing across the United States, focused on enterprise AI, healthcare AI, and industry automation. So when we initially invested in AI was called machine learning. And now since involving, have all the fancy word and also buzzword around. But we're still continue backing lots of the founder from the earlier stage, from 0 to 1. And before I started Fusion Fund, I was an entrepreneur myself. Originally from Inner Mongolia, went to United States in 2010. So I landed in Stanford University in the heart of Silicon Valley. People probably heard about the reputation of Stanford. They just give you support when you want to do something crazy. So I did something crazy. The second year of my PhD in material science, I did a startup at the age of 21, focused on early diagnostic of type 2 diabetes using machine learning. But more than 10 years ago, no investor gave me credit. Our overvalued valuation for machine learning powered healthcare solution. But eventually I sold the company and to a large public company, got financial freedom, start to do personal investment, got for IPO, eventually in 2015 start Fusion Fund. The reason I'm in Davos is also because in 2018 I became a young global leader with the World Economic Forum. So since then I've been engaging with the organization and coming to Davos to really learn and also contribute perspective, especially what is happening in the center of the global innovation in Silicon Valley. And on the other side, my personal passion on one side is healthcare AI, how to really not only just using AI to generating funny photo, funny video, but really help humankind to live a better life and be able to not only cure disease, but improve the quality of life. Another thing is I just worry about the data layer of AI, how we make sure on one side we have a global collaboration conversation on the data governance. No matter it's governance or privacy, we need to understand it better and also have a framework consistently across the country. Another thing is related to what you mentioned early on, we need to worry about the bias of the data set, which contribute to the bias of AI. And eventually, if we want AI to really serve us, we're diverse, the humankind. We want to make sure it is not a model for only certain country or certain group of people, but actually for everyone.
All right, Amy, take us home.
All right, Amy Dittmar. I'm the Provost and Executive Vice President at Rice University. I've spent my almost entire career in academia, and so I'll talk about that AI from that perspective. A couple of things that kind of brought me here, at least for this topic. You talked about how you don't have anyone who's on a beat for AI. As we built our strategic plan recently, there were a lot of people that wanted a pillar for AI, and we really pushed that it was in everything. It wasn't in one place. And so I led that, and that was a big part of it. At the same time, this is probably one of the biggest topics on college campuses. When we think about how it's impacting our young people, the topic behind me is on the humanity, but certainly on the humanities and the study thereof and the creativity that comes from that and the importance of that. It's something that we've given a lot of thought. Rice is also one of the founding institutions for some of the design and of early AI and early LLMs through the Ken Kennedy Institute. So that juxtaposition of this, incredibly pushing forward the science while still leaning into thinking about what that means for humanity and humanities has been a lot of my thought process lately.
Great. So for the rest of this panel, I'm going to direct a question at one of you, but then also let anybody else who wants to chime in jump in. It doesn't have to be everyone answers every question. That gets boring. We've all been to too many of those here, so we won't do that. And also, we're going to democratize this a little in the same regard. Instead of me just hearing me ask questions, maybe with a few minutes to go, think about if anybody else has any questions. This room feels like a room that wants to be a discussion, and I do think if we're going to humanize AI, we can humanize our panels too. So Amy, maybe with you, you're talking. You see the change. You're sitting in a college. You just talked about. You have your finger on the pulse. How would you describe the moment we're in?
Yeah, I would say the moment, there's certainly fear, and we talked about that earlier, but I want to go back to what JR said when he started and talked about the printing press. I'm going to go back a little bit farther, and I was going to do a quote, but I think for sake of time I won't. But it's a quote by Socrates that was talking about the beginning of the invention of papyrus and how it was going to destroy our education and how it was going to destroy our learning because we would no longer have to use our minds to remember because we could put things on paper. Of course, now we're not putting things on paper, we're putting them on computer, but the point is that we adapted. We adapted how we learned. We adapted what we learned, and we are doing that again. And so I'll talk more as we go throughout. But when I think about it as an educational revolution, where we have to go back to the basics and think about what am I trying to teach? What is the importance of what the critical thinking skills are? And that might not mean teaching it in the way we have, but it doesn't mean we won't be learning in the same kind of critical thinking ways.
How do we? I'm going to jump into Lou and Renee both mentioned the idea of that all makes sense, but if we don't build it correctly, right, we're going down a different path. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that, which I think is foundational, right? Because wherever we're going, right now we're going to decide which direction we're going in.
Certainly, and I would just add to the academic perspective. Right now, I have a class of 100 students, and they're all data scientists, and they're all studying big data and AI ethics, and there's an extraordinary amount of excitement. There's really no fear. There's this excitement, and there's this readiness to do well. You know, we always say,
Well, they're right at the, it's exciting because they're coming in right when this stuff's being decided. I don't know if it's exciting for everybody here, but
well, they are.
Yes,
And the good thing
they
about
get to drive the car.
yes, some of them are already working in senior data science positions, but just want the extra learning. So that is so critical. But when we're thinking about getting this thing right, it's really about the data that we use. I always say there is no AI without data. Data is the lifeblood of this technology. And if we don't think seriously enough about the level of data or the quality of data or the kinds of data that we're using, we're not going to get the systems that we want. So we've got to think about the data lineage. We've got to think about questions around just data provenance. Just how are we thinking about the data? How are we reimagining the data? One of the things I speak a lot about is data trauma and the fact that we have historically transmitted intergenerational trauma into communities through data. And that's something that we need to think about. And we're thinking about that more now when we're seeing the impact of this technology on children. And we're seeing the exploitation of child development and the extraction of children's data, their brain data, to build many of the kinds of processes that we're seeing when we think about reinforcement learning or reinforcement algorithms or reinforcement loops. So we have got to think more critically. And it really requires what I always say is an eternal ethical vigilance. What is also critical is interdisciplinary thinking. That's how we build the systems, because we've realized we can't do data science on our own. We can't build algorithms on our own. We are sophisticated, complex human beings, and we are not workflows. We are not data points. We are not calculations. We are not formula. We are human beings. So for us to get this technology right, we've really got to understand how critical accountability and transparency are. We've got to do the requisite impact assessments. We've got to do the right kinds of evaluations and audit, and we've got to bring or ensure we keep it humanly compatible and always understand that we are not algorithms. So we've got to build things in our own reflection, and it really requires a sophisticated level of thinking.
I do also want to quickly comment on the education piece. I even in Silicon Valley, we heard a lot of the worries and the challenge of the younger generation, fresh graduates saying that, okay, the job will be taken, what is my future? But if you really look at the younger generation, they're AI native. The pace of they adopt the AI tool is like fascinating. I'm a guest lecturer at Stanford, so I have a class that actually have a student from different age group. I can see the clear behavior pattern. Like actually the younger generation, they can quickly use solution like Otter AI, transcribe to be able to quickly adopt the knowledge in a very smart way versus, different age group probably have different way to interact with new technology. Even I was use an example to show how adaptive humankind can be. Just think about it. Like when I was little, I feel like if you want to get information, you got a remote controller, push a button. That's how you get information. Younger generation now, like kids now, is the touch screen. They think any screen can be an interface for them to get information. In the future, probably with AI, the voice AI interface will be very different. The kids 3 years old, you don't need to teach them. They know right away. So this is how adaptive humankind. And even we don't use certain part of brain for the old calculation or memory, but we can activate other part of brain to do more creativity. And go back to your questions asking about how we do things right within AI. I feel on one side, of course, we talk about data set, talk about bias of the data and the algorithm, but more importantly, we should not rely on one AI model solve all the problem. Because no matter what, we cannot guarantee one model gonna be equally for all different use cases. That's the reason I feel now, compared with the past 2 years, there's more consensus on, instead of talking about large language model, we probably need more small language model for vertical application use cases, and which not only is a cheaper, better, easy to deploy locally with private network, solve the privacy issue, also potentially help save the doing more accuracy and reliability, which solve the hallucination issue. So that's one direction we're going. Another thing is, I think people probably heard Silicon Valley talk too much about AGI. And what is the definition of AGI? I feel most of the use cases in the human world, we don't need AI to be as smart as a solve an Olympic medal problem. So how to be practical, have this vertical AI solution that really work alongside with human. In the future, also as us as a future leader, we need to understand how to manage both human labor and the digital labor, and both labor need to work closely together.
Well, these are Alex. I want to go to you on this because these all make sense, but you know, and the part about AI natives, I think, is dead on. I mean, part of what's fun about being at Forbes is we have our 30 under 30 list, and part of the reason that it really took off was we started it right when digital natives and social natives and iPhone natives were starting the most, you know, Snapchat and Instagram and Spotify and things like that. And now, you know, we've seen about 20 billionaires under 30 who are from AI companies in the last 2 years. It's incredible. But Alex, how do we take a lot of these ideas and how do we code it in, you know, how do we, because what we should do or must do, it doesn't mean anything if we don't figure out how we do it, right?
Right. Sadly, I'm not under 30 anymore, but I do have little kids, and I worry about them. I think I agree with everything that's being said, but I think maybe we're being too sort of avoiding the elephant in the room.
So let's go there. Slay the elephant. Go for it, Alex.
I think so. I still think it's true that every industrial revolution to date has created more jobs than it's destroyed, and I think it's true of this one, but it's different. And I'll come back to that because the revolutions to date have been doing some of the things that we do better than we used to do them, on making us do things more efficiently. This is a machine that is being us potentially better than we are, and so it's doing the thinking piece. So it's different. It's a different axis from just helping us do everyday tasks. It will do us better than we do us, and that's existentially threatening. And so this conversation is very important. I worry about my kids who are 3.
Machines already do us better than us, but it was always physical. And then what you're talking about is us doing us better than us mentally.
Mental, exactly.
Correct.
Which is the sort of definition of being human versus other animals. But
Yes.
And so I worry about my kids because they're super young in sort of kindergarten, early school. So education will be reinvented while they're in the educational system. So that's pretty crazy to think about.
Nothing like flying a plane while you fix it, right?
Exactly, yeah. There are more and more studies, and you know, I've got handwritten notes because my brain's going. I don't know about you guys, but like if I need to think about something, I'll call up a bot. And it'll do the thinking for me largely. And there are studies showing that that's atrophying important parts of our brains, right? So this is real. So we have a client who has a large number of employees in an industry that is directly affected by the ability of a bot to communicate. And I won't go into too much detail. And they're worried because part of the reason they feel good about themselves, candidly, is they're employing all these people and giving them jobs in parts of the world and paying them quite well in parts of the world where they may not otherwise be. And so my conversations with the owners have been, but the jobs they have in the future may not be working for this company. Your company will be so wildly profitable working with us, of course, that these individuals can do things for your charitable fund. They will do very different work. And so what does that look like and mean? And at some level, I don't hate the idea that I will be doing something that doesn't look like today's work, but could be something just me enjoying myself because I'm very efficient at using machines. So.
That's what's so tantalizing, right? That if we go down the right path, humanity could become more human. And if we go down the wrong path, we might not have humans. Anybody have a thought or question? Please, and you just shout it out. It's small enough we don't have to pass mics. Or no, we want mics, yes.
Thank you. Allison Shapira. I teach communication at Harvard Kennedy School of Government and just published a book on AI and authenticity for leaders. And the question that keeps me up at night most is this short-term transition of the workforce, not the digital natives, but the ones who in the near 3 to 5 years will not be effectively transitioning to this new AI economy. And my question is, whose responsibility do you think it is? Is it academia? Is it industry? Is it the AI companies or government? And I'd love to hear some thoughts on that.
not to just cheat on the answer and say all of the above, but I think it is all of the above because all of us have. Yeah, I mean, and I say that because if we think about responsible AI, and many of our companies, our institutions have definitions, and I would say any definition has to be tied to what your mission is. But if you look at the mission of a company, if you look at the mission of a government, if you look at the mission of a higher ed institution, all of them need that to happen. And so for that reason, I think it is behoove all of us. But that too requires us to rethink the system. It's not going to be go back and get a master's in AI, though there is wonderful masters in AIs out there. But that's really about the programming. It's about these kind of lifelong learning, which is a phrase we use a lot. And I think all of us have to.
I think the good news I heard is I was recently having conversation with some Fortune 500 pharmaceutical companies. So they're considered as a relative boutique industry. But one of them their CEO told me they have an in-house AI university already. They actually they require all the employee, including himself, CEO, have to go through this AI education through their own university. I think the company themselves realize the importance to transfer their existing workforce. But meanwhile, if they can also collaborating with academia to get more up-to-date information, that would be more efficient.
Who else has a question?
Hello, my name is Sabrina, and I'm currently a student at Emory University right now. And as a student, I think AI is hitting at least universities, and I'm sure high schools, elementary schools, middle schools, especially hard. While in theory, we want AI to be, for the better of humanity, it already is being irresponsibly used. And I can't think of one person, or maybe only a few people who haven't been guilty of that, like myself included. But it's impossible when you have such an incredible tool right at your desktop that can do whatever you want and whatever you ask them. And AI detectors can only do so much when there's so many ways to kind of cross-list different platforms and make you do the thinking yourself, where if you really want to, you can easily get through university at this point, no matter what the university level is, using AI. So I guess we already are at a present where AI is being misused and being used instead of critical thinking. And I'm in university, so I've at least completed high school education without AI, but I can't even begin to think about middle schoolers or elementary schoolers who get access to this. And what if they won't be able to do basic algebra? So how can we take steps to ensure that this won't continue to become a replacement for basic thinking and rather a tool?
Well, thank you so much for that question. I think it's incumbent on all institutions to have an AI policy. One of the things that I do, I will tell you in my class, is that I allow my students, their master's students, to use AI, but you have got to say when you used it. You've got to pretty much show your paper trail and show all the places it has been used. And if there's any idea, any concept, or any kind of research that is ChatGPT or any of the other models, you really need to say where it has been. But I will say this, just weeks ago, last semester, I read about 65 papers, and after 10, you can pretty much tell ChatGPT because it became so generic.
I'm going to take a slightly different perspective, and I'm going to go back to something both of you said about AI doing us better, or doing humans better. And I guess I'm going to challenge that a little bit, because you have to think about what it does well and what it doesn't do well. So if you are aficionado listening to everything on the internet, Ben Affleck has been running around. There's been a quote from him on for the last 3-minute soliloquy that he goes on, and he says one thing in it that, and I don't usually quote Ben Affleck, right, at Davos, but he talks. Yeah, he talks about how in talking about creativity and in learning with creativity and in storytelling, obviously in his field, and that AI goes to the mean, and that when you are creative, and creative can mean a lot of things, not just the arts, you know when to stop. Whereas AI will go all the way to the mean because it is trained to do that. Another perspective, if you'll give me a chance to tell a story, we have a philosopher and an English professor, Timothy Morton, who's written a number of books, and he does an exercise in his class which many professors do, where you write from a prompt. The prompt is what is a fact, and then you have AI do the same. So a lot of people do that and they critique it. But what he's found and what he's written on in sort of a Substack philosophy area is that the difference is that the fluidity that AI gets to the answer, and that kind of goes with this Ben Affleck, it doesn't stop. It's not clunky, it is almost too smooth, but as humans, we are clunky. What I mean by that, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, you could say it's doing it better, but we pause, we think, should we do that? We think, how do we do that? And I think we really need to, I don't believe we'll ever program that piece of humanity in, and maybe I'm just a naivete, or maybe I should say in my lifetime. But I do think that there's an ability to parse out and use AI to show that humanity as well.
We need to prepare for the fact that that might happen. And I think it's interesting how, I'm going to use probably the wrong word, but anthropomorphic the approach is, i.e., the goal seems to be to try and recreate us, but we're pretty imperfect and we're really biased and we sleep at night and it's like all stuff like why are we trying to get machines to look like us is a really interesting question, I think. Somebody at some point is going to need to govern this. The problem is the adoption is outpacing governance. I'm not particularly for big government, but somebody whose motive isn't profit needs to say this is how it needs to be, and here are the incentives we need to set it. Otherwise, we're done. Like it's
The problem is even, let's say the U.S. passes, you could write the bill and it gets passed. Europe, China, Africa, you're gonna need every country to adopt it. So I'm bearish on that. Last question. I'm bullish on the answer, bearish on the likelihood. Last question, quick question, because I know we're running over time, and quick answers.
All right, I'm gonna make it fast. Hi, my name is Maciek. I'm big on empathy and AI, and humanity and AI also ties into what you talked before. And you talked about adaptability, 3-year-old talking to AI is changing how we interact with technology. It might spill into real life. On the other hand, AI is more and more acting empathetically. There are models that try to replicate. I'm curious on your point of view on this topic.
Jump ball.
What is the direct question?
How do you see empathy and AI evolving on a human-to-human side through interaction with AI, and AI becoming more empathetic? Can it replace that one-to-one interactions for humans?
Just very
I
quickly.
try to make it simple.
There was an article in the New York Times today, I think, about this topic, which is basically said the machines are more empathic already than we are. Like they're better at listening was the title of this story. I don't know whether that's true or not, but there's built-in empathy. It's not really empathy, right? But it feels like empathy. And I think Reid Hoffman just launched a new therapy-based.
It's the AstroTurf of empathy.
Right. And the majority of use of ChatGPT is around therapy. Just at the Harvard Business Research just released that today. But.
And I would say that is very risky business because we're seeing the challenges with the technology when it comes to therapy. But on empathy, I will just say it is the challenge, it is the crisis at the moment. How do we get it more empathetic? I think it's just a personal responsibility, and the only thing we can do is think around governance, think about responsible AI, and of course think about that intersectionality. And I know there's an extraordinary amount of work at the intersection of AI and faith. Based in AI and, of course, of empathy. So the work is being done. But I think it's incumbent on us, right? Who we are and how we react.
Right, so
And where we choose to use it.
Right, so Renee, I'm going to ask each of you, it's just a yes or no, kind of up or down. This idea of humanity and AI, do you think, are you bullish or bearish that we'll figure this out in this stage?
I think we will. We have no choice but to.
We have a bull.
Yeah, I'm
a
very
bear.
bullish.
Bullish. Why? Very bullish. You said why very?
Very bullish.
10 word answer. Why very? Define very.
Model evolving, and we have better understanding, access to data, so we'll be able to build up better connection between technology and human.
Okay, data will save us. All right.
I guess I would say we're going to continue to figure that out. Just as we don't really know what humanity is. I mean, what is to be human? I think how we would define that 100 years ago.
That question is very human in itself, isn't it?
Right, and so I think we have to, we can't find the answer. We have to continue to evolve with that answer. Yeah.
Great. And with that, thank you, panel, for a really great way to start this 2-hour session. Thank you. And we're just going to... go up. And I'm going to call up Emerson. We're just going to keep it free-flowing here. In fact, Emerson, I'm going to sit next to you, kind of Oprah style. I'm going to get I might, don't hold it, if I Tom Cruise on this couch, don't hold it against me. And 2 mics, good, so we don't have to pass around. All right, I love the segue here. Emerson, if you could introduce yourself, but Emerson oversees at Zeus a crazy amount of power, true power, compute power, and I think a lot of what we just talked about, if you're going to be a bull, depends on your kind of stuff, whether it's how it's doable, how can we do it. But why don't you introduce yourself and we can dive into it.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Emerson Farrell. I'm the chairman and founder of Zeus. We're an AI infrastructure company. Better. There we go. So my name is Emerson Farrell. I'm the chairman and founder of Zeus. We're an AI infrastructure company. I think, this room, I think this town right now, this week, there's a lot of angst, right? And what is the problem?
That's Greenland, actually, but about AI also,
Yeah.
yes.
So I think part of it is just thinking about, all right, what's the problem, right? And I think the previous panel, great perspective, is thinking about the use cases, right? And does AI replace human emotion and empathy, et cetera? There's a whole ecosystem that I think we sometimes forget, which is what's happening to create the ability to have all this compute. So from Zeus's perspective, we're sort of taking more of the physical aspect in terms of how we approach this. A single sort of AI campus will consume the same amount of power as New York City, right? We theoretically need to build about 200 of those in the next 5 years. That just can't happen, right? So there's a thoughtfulness to this, and I think the word that really sort of has inspired me, right? So we were fortunate at Zeus to go visit with some of the leaders at the Vatican and Pope Leo. And the word is collaboration, right? There's a lot of collaboration and innovation that needs to happen, right? And I think that also permeates sort of the theme here at Davos this week, right? Because we can kind of be reckless about the applications. We can be reckless about how we create these campuses that power the compute, or we can be thoughtful, right? And I think that's sort of at the genesis of all of it.
How does, we touched on regulation a minute ago. There's always a risk of over-regulating, and there's always a risk of under-regulating. How do we get that right?
So I think one of your other questions, right, was sort of where does the solution come from? Academia, government. I don't think government's going to be able to react quickly enough, right? So at Zeus,
And you got half the U.S. senators can't even use a computer. Well, I'm not kidding. I mean, you have, people in their 70s and 80s, the majority of the Senate. So
not to pick on the U.S., I think it's a consistent issue, right? We have across all governments.
that is absolutely right.
Right. I think even us, I'm 45, right? But the way in which I think a question from the crowd earlier, right, was how do people in college, or even my niece and nephew, right? How is ChatGPT impacting their ability to learn? Is a fundamental question, right? And I think that's one of the reasons, at Zeus, we've partnered with the Vatican, right, and sort of have a call to arms of all the various leaders in this industry to come together and begin to think about it, because there's a lot of, obviously, profit and capital to be made. Zeus is doing very well. We will hopefully be continue to do
A
very
name
well.
like Zeus, I would hope so, yes.
But I think the bigger question is not how are we beating our peer, right, but how are we and our peers working together, because this is going to be truly, not to sound like an American, but it's going to be driven by the private sector. Right, and so we have to be proactive as leaders in the private sector to work with, and this is just one of the things that's been really inspirational for me this past month. I'm a spiritual person, not practicing a specific religion recently, but in going to the Vatican, it's really inspirational to see such a legacy religious institution leaning forward. And I think that's something we can all sort of be inspired by, regardless of our religions, is how we can come together and collaborate. Because this is a transformative, I don't think it's a revolutionary moment, I think it's a transformative moment for humanity.
You talked just now about the need to collaborate, but talk in real time. How is that? I mean, are you seeing there does seem to be? I mean, it doesn't look like Sam Altman and Elon Musk are going to be having tea anytime soon. How is that going from where you sit in the areas that you play in?
So, we've proactively reached out to some of our peers to try to find solutions. One of the things that we innovated at Zeus is thinking about how our campuses aren't just taking from local communities. We're not plugging in the power grid and taking, right? We innovated a way in which we connect in 3 different ways to the grid. So we are creating energy in a sustainable way, consuming it, and then also contributing. So that's something we could have patented. We did not, right? And so I think that you have to collaborate, right? And we can't sort of wait, right? We have to be at places like Davos. We have to think about how can we innovate, how can we work together. We will make a lot of profit, but how do we do it in a sustainable way? Because this is, again, to repeat myself, this is a transformative moment.
I took this note. You talked about resilience through integration. What is that? Can you define that? I thought that was a very nice term.
Yeah, I have a great PR comm team, right? So, the idea was sort of the fundamental physical way in which we design Zeus campuses, right? So there's resiliency there in terms of how we're integrating various types of energy and power. But then I think it kind of goes through and permeates the whole ecosystem, right? I think one of the things that we think about at Zeus is, or I personally think about how there's this race, right? And we're thinking about this country versus that country, or this foundational, LLM versus that. I think really the success of it will be such that there will be 4 or 5 LLMs, right? And this will be something where all countries and groups can access it, still in a competitive manner, right? But I think one of the previous panel was talking about the bias.
Just like there are 4 or 5 browsers and 4 or 5.
Correct. Yeah.
And so then you're going somewhere with bias now.
Yeah, so I think one of the ways in which we kind of, again, the human element, I think, can't be lost in this, right? I think one of the aspects in which we continue to sort of keep the benefit of how we're all human is by having sort of a variety, right? And so one of the ways in which we think about, the infrastructure of this, sort of the non-sexy aspect of AI, is how we will sort of build an ecosystem, and there'll be sort of these meetup spots. So you'll have Meta, Microsoft, OpenAI, et cetera, their LLMs sort of collaborating at these sync hubs.
But you're right on the front lines because you're talking about the infrastructure. How do we put a morality, or is there a way to use infrastructure to do some of the stuff we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes? That would be a way to hard code it if you could put it into the infrastructure.
It's a great question. So, that's one of the ways in which we've, myself personally, have tried to sort of be more open-minded, right? Going and meeting with leaders at the Vatican, right? Talking to other sort of competitors, i.e. peers, to understand, again, inherent in a Zeus campus, again, not to sort of refer back to our model, but we are giving back as much as we take in terms of the energy. And I think that's sort of perhaps an inspiration for how we should always think about the ecosystem, right? Whether it's the physical infrastructure, whether it is the use cases in terms of the apps that are built on it.
How are we doing on time? Let's maybe go to the room. Okay, good. 5 minutes. Let's go to the room. Anybody have a question for Emerson? Right back here, gentlemen. Hold it. Oh.
Hi, it's a pleasure listening to the discourse backwards and forwards, so thank you for the conversation. My real interest, I'm a humanitarian by background, but I've worked heavily in the commercial sector as well. And what I'm getting from the panel, and now I'm getting in this conversation, is it's being driven by money and the need to make money. No, it's not. It's being driven by social purpose. This balance is playing out now, yeah? Once the field sets, it won't change from that mindset. How do we make sure we get this mindset right now? It's the big question for me. Can we balance this head and heart, or do we have to think in radically different ways? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And so I think, the old tech approach is break it and see what happens. I think from our perspective, both the actual AI...
Move fast and break things, right?
Thank you, yeah. Both the infrastructure, right? This infrastructure can't be ripped out later. So you have to get it right the first time. And on the other end, you have to get the AI correct, right?
So forgive me, can I just push you?
Yeah, I know.
We have to get it right. And what are we doing now to get that right?
So people like...
The money's leading, right? I mean, there's no doubt that right now we're in the...
So personally, right? So I'm an investor and multi-company entrepreneur, right? I didn't have to go do this. I could have retired a few years ago. This is one of those moments where, I would call on everybody, if you don't sort of like the political environment, et cetera, to lean in, right? To help find solutions.
we spent more money than our competitors in our design and development. So when he talks about having 3 interconnections to the grid, each one of those things costs millions of dollars. Each one of those things has a substation, which costs millions of dollars. So if I go to a customer and say, hey, it's going to cost you more money, but it's the right thing to do, we put that on our back because we think it's the right thing to do. And it's easy to assume that we're all capitalistic and motivated, because we are, but ultimately the right thing and the profitable thing do not have to be different. Because the way that we design the grid, our campuses, it will save our customers in energy costs over time, right? So it's doing the right thing now, it's also the right thing later, you just have to work hard at it. And when you're racing and trying to be fast, sometimes you lack that clarity, so you just need the conviction. And so I think we're not the only ones that are doing the right thing.
Yes, we're rolling. Yes. You're jumping at it. I love it.
No, I mean, the thing is for me, I'm one of these meek people that usually listens to the response, yeah? Yes. I've got a published book in social investment. I led for a university social investment for 5 years. And what I learned from that is that you try and balance head and heart. And actually, it didn't happen. Yeah? Actually, that didn't happen in the end. So unless we bake in behaviors now for the future, and I'm listening really carefully, because this is going to be the really interesting piece for me in the future. And you talked about how you're doing good. Well, actually, we need that at a meta level, to bake in the social and to have other people that feel like you and do like you, yeah? Because this is going to be a competitive market, and it's going to come down to the least common denominator and the lowest cost. How do we avoid that now? Learning from the social investment world, it's been denuded because people haven't actually kept the social at the heart of what they've done. They've gone for the money. Forgive me. That's my whinge. I take it back.
Last word, Emerson.
Last word, yeah.
Take us home, baby.
All right.
Take us home, Emerson.
So I think this goes back to sort of the theme of the V Lab, right? So one of the 4 V's is virtue, right? And at the beginning of my career, I was lucky enough to go to Harvard, and it was a highly, going in first, a competitive environment, right? But now looking back, the most important value that I got out of that experience at Harvard was the collaboration, right, with these other people. And so you're exactly right. We have to collaborate. We have a limited window of opportunity to do so, right? And I think that's where we have to be able to reach out to as many different people right now, because in 5 years it'll be too late. I think in 5 months it might be too late, right? So really and that's sort of where and why Zeus has been working with the Vatican, and where we're calling on any and all interested parties to participate in the dialogues this summer, because we have to get it right.
Good way to end. Thank you. Thanks, Emerson. Thank you for coming. Thank you for, especially this time, you're right. Now's the time, by the way. If anybody took anything out of the last hour, put it into practice now, because saying, okay, I'm going to think about it next year, come back here and think about what I'm going to do is too late. Thank you, Emerson. And I'm going to turn over to Bob for the second half of our show here.
So I have the pleasure of talking with Mike Posner, and I will let Mike introduce himself because I certainly can't do justice to it. But I just want to say 2 things about Mike before we get started. The first is that Mike has, I think, dedicated his career to advancing humanity in a variety of different forms. And so his perspectives in this conversation are so very important. And then second, this whole concept of this dialogue here today really has Mike's fingerprints on it. He's been a valuable resource to all of us for the last few months. So Mike, thank you for bringing us here. But why don't you share a little bit about your work and your background and maybe how that ties to your perspectives on AI?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. Great to be here. I am a professor at New York University. I'm in the business school, and I run the first Center on Business and Human Rights really anywhere in the world. And the idea was we're pro-business, but we want high standards. And previously I worked in government. I was the Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor in a very different administration, the Obama administration. And I've worked in the tech sector. We started out, I worked the tech companies during the so-called Arab Spring, recognized the power of technology, the power of social media as a force for good. And then in this position at NYU, we began to look at some of the challenges of disinformation, harmful content online, and began to really look at the question of governance. How do you moderate content? We've done reporting now also on the gaming industry and some of the extremism that plays itself out in the chat rooms on gaming. And more recently, we've begun to look at AI, both the advantages of it and some of the challenges in terms of how it's playing out over time.
So you used the word governance a few times. In practical terms, what does that mean? I mean, there's not like a board of directors sitting over all things AI. There's, as we talked about, it's going to be almost impossible to come up with this global regulatory framework. So how does governance apply to AI, either where we are today or where we might be going in the future?
So I want to pick up on the question that was asked a little while ago, because I think in almost every, we look at global supply chains, we're looking at technology, we're looking at the investment sector. Almost inevitably, there's a tension between maximizing financial returns in the short term and doing the right thing. Companies need to be involved, certainly in these discussions centrally. I agree with Emerson. I agree with everything that's been said. But it's also true that companies left to their own devices, many of them, are going to push to maximize returns. They're going to race to figure out how do we make the most profit. And so what we really need is some combination, in my judgment, between companies acting in the right ways, but being nudged, kicked in the pants a little bit by government, if you will, to make sure that they don't act only in their financial self-interest. I really admire what Zeus is doing. I want to see the hyperscalers in this room. I want to see Microsoft and Amazon and Google and NVIDIA all basically coming together to figure out what's the way forward here. If we're really talking about the expansion of the infrastructure at the level we're talking, it's not going to be done without those companies making a judgment. We're going to have to invest in doing things in a different way. And it also means that governments, especially in the developing world, the Indonesias, the Mexicos, are going to have to figure out how do those governments protect their own people. So it's a combination of the private sector and governments acting to protect their own people.
So it feels like we're back to a question of balance again. Of, you know, how can we allow for the, frankly, I think the much needed acceleration in the build out of AI infrastructure in a way that doesn't inhibit progress or doesn't limit innovation. So where's that balance between regulation and overregulation?
Yeah, so again, I want to see companies make a profit. I want to see them be innovative. But I don't want, there's a kind of rush now. Everybody in the, again, these big companies in particular, there's kind of a race to get out front, to not miss the opportunity to be the one that cashes in. It leads to a lot of activity that isn't rational and isn't smart. And so what we need to be doing is slow down the train a little bit. Think collectively. I'm talking about the biggest companies. What are we doing? What are the consequences of what we're doing? Can we do it better? Can we come up with some common industry standards so we're all playing by the same rules? And can we think innovatively about what the technology is, what it ought to be, and how to both make a profit and do what's right for the communities where we're now operating? They're huge challenges. We don't have enough electricity. Communities don't have enough water. There are communities where a data center is going to be put in, it's going to dislocate people. Those are realities. Again, I'm not against AI or the expansion. We need these data centers, but it has to be done in a rational, ethical way, and there needs to be more coordination and more thought about how we're going to get there in a sensible, sustainable way.
Do you feel that as a society, be it governance, be it policy, be it collaboration in the private sector, that we are moving at the necessary pace to meet these challenges? And if not, what could be done to spur the pace of that kind of collaboration and forward thinking, shall we say?
We're not moving anywhere near at the pace to figure out what needs to be done. Companies are investing billions and billions of dollars in this race to be first. That's not necessarily going to get them there. There's going to be a lot of wasted time, money, and energy. But there isn't at this point the kind of blueprint for what are the rules of the road? How do we do this in a way that both allows innovation, allows profit, but also recognizes that there are human consequences to how this is being done? There are better ways and worse ways to advance the technology. We need to just take a moment here, take a deep breath, and say, wait a minute, this is a moment where there's so much at stake. It's happening so fast. And rather than just race against some imprecise target because we don't want to be left behind, let's try to figure out how do we do this intelligently, collectively. There's plenty of money to be made for all of these companies, but that's not the mindset.
So then, Professor, you heard a little bit about the vision for how this leads to the Borgo Dialogues and beyond. So as we are thinking through the next 6 months, 5-6 months and beyond, what are some things that we as a collective group should be thinking about to your point, take a pause, think through the pros and cons, think maybe long-term instead of short-term. Give us some thoughts that could kind of guide how we move ahead as frankly as a group.
I think one thing is you want to spend a lot of time figuring out who's at the table. The companies that have the greatest impact, that have the greatest resources, need to be part of the discussion. That won't be easy. They're not necessarily so comfortable sitting in a room with each other. Or to take this pause because they're too busy racing forward. The second thing is that I think you need to be thinking about a smart role for government. I heard in some of the previous conversations, governments aren't the answer. Every government's not the answer. Some governments are, in fact, seriously trying to figure out what to do about this. And those that are most thoughtful in governments and in intergovernmental organizations ought to be part of that discussion. And then you need some experts, and you need some people from communities. It's really important to listen to people who are on the receiving end of this. What did it feel like when all of a sudden a data center went in? How is it impacting us? And what do you learn from those things? We need to do a lot of listening, but it needs to be a genuinely multi-stakeholder discussion where those perspectives are presented often in contradiction to each other. That's a healthy thing.
Or a teacher or a clinical psychologist
Exactly.
who's kind of at the front lines of how we think and learn. So we have a few minutes. Would love to ask the audience for any questions or comments.
Yes, hi, many thanks for your thoughts. My name is Sergey. I am a senior director at EPAM Systems, the private company. And you mentioned a couple of times that, in your opinion, private capital, or private companies, or basically big companies need to be part of the dialogue. However, the problem, as I see, is that companies are not free to act. They are part of the modern day capitalism or even an imperialism system where the CEO has board and board has investors and investors have expectations. So let's imagine those AWSs, Microsofts will be at the table and decide, yeah, let's do something more ESG related. Their stock would tank the next day, the next session, simply because pension funds would not agree. They need to pay pensions. They cannot afford their investments to behave the other way. So my question is, do you really believe that companies can change the discourse outside of the need to change capitalism as the system, like comprehensively? Is capitalism, does it allow to change governance in its current state? Thank you.
Yeah. So I wrote a book called Conscience Incorporated, and the book says basically you can make a profit and act responsibly. I think there's a business case in the capitalist system for doing the right thing. You can't do it in 3 months. And so, Milton Friedman and I don't agree. I think there is a way to make a long-term bet on doing the right thing that will both make healthy profits and do the right thing for society. That's the goal here. And certainly some investors, some boards of directors are going to say, what you're saying is nonsense. I live with that in my business school. Not everybody in my finance department agrees with me.
Yes, thank you. You mentioned you're going to do it in 3 months, but somebody said today that we have maybe 5 months to go. Probably timing is the key. Thank you once again.
Thanks for your leadership, Mike. My question is actually really similar to his. Like if NVIDIA doesn't meet their stock or meet their expectations, then we slip into like a global recession. So my question is, are these companies actually too big? Like even within the leadership of these companies, they're not talking or collaborating, even though they know that this is an issue. If they can't collaborate within, let's say, Google, how can you bring them together across multiple companies the size of Google? And the consequences are such that if they do slow down, all of us see our portfolios, just in the tank. It just seems like we're so reliant on a very, very small group of people for our economic and humanistic future.
Yeah. I mean, the last I looked at the stock market, the U.S. stock markets, the markets are going up quite dramatically, and 7 or 8 companies, tech companies, are leading that charge. Those companies can be highly profitable and act in a more thoughtful way in the way in which they deal with this coming expansion of technology and the infrastructure. Now, everybody, and you're absolutely right, and we've seen it in companies. There are debates within companies, but smart companies make judgments all the time that are trying to figure out what's in the best longer-term interest. Not every company does that, but the ones that are really successful, that are going to be around in 10 years, are making judgments all the time. What do we need to invest to do the right thing? To do the right thing for society, but also to make sure that we really are a sustainable business. That's the argument I'd make to Microsoft or Google or Amazon.
One question here, and then we'll do our last question over here.
I wonder if there isn't maybe more reliable potential capitalist energy in the fortune to be made in, say, like assurance tech and those that can create the technologies that make sure it's safe in front of children, that make sure that sycophancy doesn't lead to unhappiness, and those that are doing the sort of frontier eval work to join forces with like the enterprise solutions of the regulated industries of the world and civil society to say like, this is a big market for us. Like making sure that this goes right is a big market. The 4 of you can run at capabilities as fast as you want to rate it, but if it's going to diffuse through our society, here's the green check marks we're going to need to see before we go out. And I just wonder if what you're pointing out is there's a lot of money to be made, if maybe that money shouldn't be made by those 4, but kind of a countervailing force of a different market that could grow up alongside of it.
Yeah, I don't think it's either or. I think that's an interesting area. Certainly, my colleague John Haidt has been pushing for restrictions on use of technology by kids. He pushed and encouraged the Australian government a month ago to say kids under 16 shouldn't have access to social media. We'll see how that goes. I think it's the right direction. Kids at school should not have access to their cell phone. But I do think, again, I don't want that to be a substitute for what we're talking about. The infrastructure for AI is so fundamental to everything in terms of how people are going to get access to information and succeed commercially, and also in terms of education, in terms of everything. We need to get it right. This is the moment for the biggest companies to be thinking about what's the way in which they can promote that expansion of the infrastructure in a way that's good for them and good for the societies where they operate.
So we have one final question, if we could pass the mic.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Professor, very nice to see you here. My question is a little bit departing from the questions that you've received, but in relation to the roles of companies. Not in terms of access to AI, but more about in relation to the future of work and social capital. I'm Chief Sustainability Officer of PMI, and I think a lot about value creation in multiple forms of capital beyond just financial capital. And you talk about companies doing the right thing, and I fully agree with you on your view of value creation. But it's difficult to know what to do because we don't know how the future of work looks like, because we really don't know how to upskill, reskill, and prepare your social capital, your human capital, to what will come. So I don't expect you to have the answer, but I'm very curious about what are your thoughts on that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I mean, one thought, this morning I heard Dan Schulman, who now runs Verizon, talk about the fact that there are going to be hundreds of millions of jobs lost because of new technologies. There'll be some gained, but he said the most important thing as a CEO is to be honest with your employees, to say that this is not going to be the same. There are going to be whole sets of work that are going to be eliminated or dramatically scaled back. I think we have to be honest about that. And you can do scaling, you can do training, there's all kinds of things to mitigate that, but the technology is just too powerful. There are whole ranges of things that people now do for a living that are not going to be done in 10 years.
Thank you, Mike. Your insights, your opinions are greatly appreciated. So please, thank you, Mike. So now in true Davos fashion, we will try to bring our final panel up kind of on the fly. So I've been trying to look for our panelists. So if you are here, if you're part of the final panel, please come to the stage. You're one. It's good to see you, Natalia. We could have another fireside chat at the rate we're going here. Needy. And Dr. Evans.
Where do you want me?
Anywhere here. Okay. Please. So I will, because we're doing this on the fly, I will allow ask each of the panelists to give a brief background, because I think we have some very, very interesting perspectives here. But the reason we wanted to conclude with this panel is because we are really going to talk about how AI connects to us, not only as people in this moment, but what do we as a society, what do we as persons, as individuals, where will we be in 10 years because of AI? So we're asking this panel to take us on a bit of a journey as to here we are today, where might we be in the future? So maybe if we could just pass the mics and allow each of the panelists to give them a brief background and similar to the first panel, why are you here? What brought you not only to Davos, but to this conversation?
Hello, I'm Arthur Evans. I'm the CEO for the American Psychological Association. And my personal interest in AI started back in 1983 when I was in an experimental psychology program, and we were looking at how to create models that could be replicated within computers in terms of solving math problems. So fast forward, I become CEO of American Psychological Association. The issues have changed dramatically over that time period. And our interest in this issue of AI is, what we see is that there are a lot of issues that are happening in this space that are really human in nature. They're not technical issues. And in fact, I would argue that many of the greatest challenges that we face in terms of AI are not technical issues. They are, how are these technologies going to be used? What's the impact? We have documented that there are psychological and mental health impacts for youth and for, in particular, but for others as well. So our interest is, how do we ensure that psychological science, that psychological expertise, that the voice of people with lived experience is a part of this conversation and can help shape policy and deployment?
Thank you. So interesting. I'm Natalia. I lead Foresight for Autodesk, which is a design technology company. I lead our practice focused on artificial intelligence and climate change futures, alongside other amazing researchers in the research arm of the company. who are thinking about economics and geopolitics. And my interest in Davos is at that intersection, so artificial intelligence and then environmental concerns and ethics. So I'm excited to get into this panel across those themes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nidhi Chadha. I'm the founder and CEO of Enzo Advisors. Founded Enzo about 5 years ago to focus on sustainability for both corporates and investors, really honing in on what is the so what of sustainability. Why does it drive value creation? Why does it mitigate risk? And I did that from the lens of working on Wall Street for 20 plus years. I was in financial services where I focused on spearheading ESG integration across public portfolios. So to the earlier questions about NVIDIA and public markets, happy to chat about that offline. But in addition to sustainability, I've also been focused on AI from the lens of wearing a dual hat as a Chief Impact Officer for RGS, Richmond Global Sciences. They are an AI intelligence platform focused on impact measurement. And so I have really been very personally and professionally focused on taking data and being able to say sustainability does drive value. And I'm really excited to tell you all today that we've done a lot of great analysis to showcase that the AI tools that have been built out are showcasing that we are able to create value in public markets and now moving to private. So I'm excited to share this conversation with folks at Davos, and most importantly, a lot of the agenda priorities really tie with what I'm personally and professionally excited about.
Thank you. Thank you all. So throughout this discussion, we've heard kind of the word disruption used in a lot of different ways, right? As us as individuals, as the economy, we're at in a revolutionary moment, a transformative moment. Looking ahead 10 years, 15 years, a generation, what would each of you say would be the most significant point of disruption that we will experience because of AI, either personally or at the macro level at the economy?
I can kick that off. I think that where we are today in AI in terms of the technical and technology side, I feel very excited that we actually can solve some of the most complex challenges. Food insecurity, energy, and these are challenges that we have the tools and technology to solve for. But what I worry about is, per earlier comments, about do we have the governance and the policy protocols? Are we falling behind on actually implementing this in an appropriate fashion? That's my only concern as to why we can't move as quickly as we can. But I do feel that we are just in early innings. Thinking about that $20 trillion of impact AI could have on the global GDP. Just by 2030 alone. And in order to achieve that, I think we are very far along on the track on the technology, but not so much on the policy side.
I get the joy of facilitating these very interesting sessions with our tech executives and product teams and research. And we've been doing some wargaming as a strategic exercise where we sort of take different scenarios and you get a persona, maybe you're NVIDIA, maybe you're a global leader, and we play out the sort of what would you do in these different trajectories where AI is becoming more of a dominant force. We've got company. And one thing that's emerged that I thought just kind of tickled me as a potential disruption is the value shift from sort of today a lot of like consumer goods and a lot depends on like the price of oil, to this world where the thing that AI cannot do is the sort of like raw materials. Like even if you have amazing AI capabilities and you're able to replicate companies, even if we have incredible robotics and physical AI attached to those AI systems, at the end of the day, all of those companies will need land to create energy. They'll need critical minerals to do the chips that they're going to have to rely on. They'll need metal to build the transportation and the robotics. And so I think one of the disruptions is that kind of like value shift into like really like, yes, the AI software and that IP, but also the physical stuff that feeds it. And then I think the other disruption is going to be around alignment. So what are the core like values and desires that we work as a global community to try and imbue into those systems and that companies are trying to navigate as they deliver value?
I think that the thing that I think about a lot is how is AI going to redefine what it means to be human and what it means to be a psychologist or an accountant or a lawyer. And it's interesting when I watch what some of the capabilities are. 10, 15 years ago, we said, oh, computers will never be able to do that. Well, now they are. And that's only going to accelerate, and it's accelerating in a lot of different fields. And so as these technologies start to take over more and more of what we used to do, particularly those things that we used to do that define who we are, if I'm a psychologist, for example, a practicing psychologist, and one of the things that I can do is develop a therapeutic relationship with someone, well, you have computers or these systems that we don't believe that's good therapeutic relationships, but they are developing relationships that the person believes is a human relationship. And those kinds of things are going to continue to happen. And so what does it mean? How do we shift? And I think the disruption is how quickly can we adapt to readjust how we define ourselves and how we define our roles in society.
So that's a wonderful track, and I want to go a little deeper on that, because when I was, when we were putting together these sessions, and in particular through the, the lens of the Vatican and the faith, I saw some arguments that where people were contemplating that AI could almost replace our altruistic tendencies, right? That you could essentially say, on the first of every month, $20 from my bank account is going to go to this local charity. It is, on the 15th of the month, it is going to remind me that I need to volunteer next week. And so instead of having these more spontaneous human reactions to our environment, we essentially become driven by AI reminders that we have programmed in to remind us to be an altruistic person. Is that an extreme example, or is that something that is kind of within the realm of possibilities?
I like it, but I think it's limited in that, in some ways you could automate a direction out of your account now to philanthropy, many people do. And I feel like the bigger opportunity is, I'm coming back to this alignment piece, but sort of what are the globally agreed priorities and goals that want to be expressed through these models, especially if we're using them as this infrastructure layer across everything that we're doing. Amazon has autonomous supply chain agents. They do purchase decisions. They route vehicles. Those choices have, at least on the environmental side, emissions impacts. They have resource impacts. On the mental health front, as we dialogue more with chat agents, there are sort of social well-being implications. And so I think that the impact opportunity is going to be in coming together and deciding what sort of we want as a civilization. And I think the current analogy for this is we're dealing with climate change. It's the first time we've put together this intergovernmental agreement system. We have annual convenings at the Conference of the Parties. We renegotiate terms. We make commitments. I could see that kind of thing happening in AI to try and establish what are the goals, what do we care about as a global community, and then translating that into sort of the training, reinforcement learning for these systems so that they're expressing those. Obviously, it's a long pathway, but I think that sort of takes you out of a decision where you're like, let me put my 20% a week away, to something where every micro interaction that you're having with the system is making that ethical choice in some way for you, because it's sort of a part of the DNA of that system.
So I'm not opposed to us using technology to make that decision, because that's getting us into the agentic AI workflow and we're moving in the right direction. I do worry about the data and the underlying models, to your point. That is actually a big concern, because if you think about the altruistic opportunities and what's out there, if we aren't collecting the right data from the right organizations and for the right causes, then are we actually just siloing ourselves to a very biased view on what is truly charity and what's altruistic? That is my fundamental concern about the direction we're going in. I like the fact that we're using it for decision making. Are we getting a little bit lazy? Perhaps. If by show of hands, how many people actually use ChatGPT to look at something in Davos, while you were here? I'm sure a lot of us did. So I think there is an element of that, but I think my biggest concern is really about the underlying models and where we can be biased in our decisions.
Well, I think that what part of your question is, do we atrophy if we stop using that muscle, right? And I think the biggest risk is probably with children. And the more we have functions that are part of the normal developmental stages that we go through and that children historically have engaged in, that now get taken over by technology, I think that that is a worry. And I don't know if we can quantify that yet, but it's definitely something we need to pay attention to.
So how would you address that worry? I mean, we've heard this come up in every panel, right? The impacts of AI on students, the youth, how we learn. How can we start, shall we say, in healthcare financing terms, like bending the curve and really bringing kind of the more human dimension back into how, in particular, kids and young people learn, process, gain information, and so on?
I don't have anything to say right now. No, I'm kidding. I actually don't have anything. Yeah. You see, it's already started. AI is called atrophy. I don't know. I think that it is absolutely something we have to pay attention to. What are the skills that we need as people? I think we think a lot in terms of the technical skills that we need that are being replaced, but there are some very human skills that we need. We're talking about relationship, and you see these applications now where people are purporting that with these systems you can develop a relationship that can replace human relationships. I completely understand that as a psychologist who knows that there is a gap between the number of people who need help and the people who can get help, but I do worry about if we rely on that and we don't think about what muscles are not being utilized and what the risks of that are, I think we can find ourselves in some problems. So I think we got to do both. I am definitely not a person who believes that we have all of these problems and we just need to stop AI. First of all, I don't think that's realistic, but I also don't think we should miss the opportunities to solve real problems that we have.
I would just say that from an education standpoint, what I've seen work wonders is internships, actually. It's been very interesting. With a number of our clients, I've seen interns from high school through college where they were given a component of the AI policy or a scorecard to work on. And I literally worked with an intern who was he's a college student, and he basically came up with a vendor scorecard on how he would evaluate various AI tools because he knows it, he uses it for school, and he was able to develop that. And I was really impressed with what we have been able to do. So I think that continuous workforce really starts at that university level and being able to give them some real-time projects.
Yeah, I'm less close to childhood psychology, but I think when I think about kids related to this topic, it's sort of workforce eventually that they'll be a part over at least having lives of meaning and purpose and interest. And then that leads us to the question of sort of what are the jobs that we think will exist? So much debate, but some that are emerging human in the loop roles. So you are the quality control, you are the verifier, maybe you're the trainer of the AI systems. What are the skills that you're gonna need for that? I'm myself not sure, but expertise seems to be rising up. So the more expert you are in a field, the more likely you are to be called upon as that human in the loop role for whatever the question is. In mental health, it might be the world's best psychologist is the one that you want to train the system that you're gonna dialogue with instead of therapy, if it comes to that. So I think that sort of expertise, I think for Autodesk, it's creativity software, and so that is an accessible activity, whether you're an adult or a child. So how do you start to build offerings that someone can build their creativity muscle in early? That doesn't require a lot of technical ability. And I think that sort of like creativity and being able to be an incredible prompt engineer, just like what is the question? I used to work at this design company called IDEO for many years. And we thought a lot about not what's the right solution, but what's the right question to start the whole process with. And so I think similarly in AI, it's sort of like what is, like your ability to define the quest is the thing that will differentiate you. So for the kids, I would point them that way.
Bob, I would also say that one area where I've seen a big hole on education is in small businesses. So I sit on the National Small Business Association on their AI task force, and we literally were struggling with trying to figure out how do we help our whole small business constituency to be able to develop these skill sets. And so it could be people that have been doing, any types of businesses across, states and even various counties, but we've seen a lot of struggle with, we don't know how to apply AI, we don't even know where to begin. And so if we can work on some type of educational program, from a national level, at least we see that in the States, that would be actually pretty important as well.
Those are great insights. So I know we're running towards the end of the day. So I do want to open it up for a few questions. But I also just want to put a plug in for a conversation that we'll have here tomorrow with Bill Gates, the CEO of Siemens Health Systems, and Shankam Verdantar, who's the moderator of the Hidden Brain podcast. And it's going to be talking about how we can use AI and other technologies to really understand the health of our brain, to get ahead of really life-altering diseases such as Alzheimer's by using these types of technologies. So it's going to be looking at really the hands-on deployment of AI and similar technologies, not just AI, but to kind of get ahead of what might our future be as humans and what the future of our brains might be. So if you're interested, please RSVP for that conversation because it's going to be quite interesting. So few questions for our final panel to set us off on the right foot.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the discussion. And I've been thinking, and I have two concerns, and obviously we all have many. And I would like to hear your thoughts. One thing is, I've been hearing a lot of optimism about humanity and humans, and how if we collaborate and talk about it and do the right thing, then we can train the AI the right way, and then the outcome will be good. However, thinking about it, humans have been failing to train humans actually, in a positive way to do the right thing. And then the other thing I've been thinking about as well during the conversations. Again, we've been saying, okay, there should be collaboration, there should be dialogue, and this is how we set up the governance. And however, even today, the AI agents are trained to be personalized. So they actually respond to you and what you want from it. And also, we've been hearing about all these suicide cases, especially among the young people, because they have been training their AI in the middle of a depression, and the answer was, unfortunately, not the right one, or the options they were given, and they followed them, some of them. So those things I've been thinking about during the discussions, and I'd be very happy to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
I think it goes back to the data bias problem, and so something that we're also thinking about is this inclusive innovation. And frankly, I think it's a big challenge because we're not collecting data from the communities that are essentially marginalized, so our data is biased. So actually, I'm also an investor in healthcare companies, a private investor, and one of the challenges we've seen is investing in AI for solving mental health cases, and what can we do to develop that type of technology to support biomarkers. And we haven't found really great solutions because the underlying data has that bias in it. And so I think we're wells away from, especially in healthcare, to solving that, and we're still having that impact both in healthcare and financial services. I actually think it's a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, the good and the bad is sort of the duality that we're riding into the future, and I think that's true of every emerging technology, nuclear, the internet. It's the applied use that matters. I'm seeing amazing things. I'm very passionate about climate change, so applied use for discovering new materials and adding to battery storage capabilities, carbon capture. But that's a question of whether that's continue to be applied there. I think on the sort of mental health and risk side, you can do things like constitutional AI, where you sort of set a boundary, a barrier for the AI to then stay within. And so there's a lot of work to try and make sure that there's some of that around suicide. The degree to which that is successfully expressed in the model has a lot to do with the training, the data, the inputs. But in a lot of cases, for the big models, the training and data is sort of everything that wasn't gated and is within IP constraints. And so then the constitutional AI and the training comes in to kind of nudge it into a place of more safety. So I think additional investment in that and getting that really right is going to be important as well.
The only thing I would add is this, the issues around how these technologies work and whether they lead to people killing themselves or other poor outcomes. These are solvable problems. I think they're complex problems, but they're solvable. And AI exists in a ecosystem, and what I hope is that our ecosystem will demand that these problems are addressed and that the people who can help address those problems are at the table as these things get deployed.
Any other thoughts or questions? Back here.
Hi, my name is Max. I'm co-founder of drug discovery company working to end aging. We rejuvenated mice going to humans through dogs. And the question is, isn't it stopping aging is the biggest alignment that we can have with AI? Do you think the AI technologies should be focused, because once we extend human life, we extend space for AI to create more goods for people living longer?
So the question is, should the primary focus of AI be extending human life and longevity? It's a very complex question.
Yeah, I don't know if extending life, but certainly making life better. Hopefully, in doing so, you extend life.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very personal question, I think. The classic dinner conversation of would you want to live forever, would you want to be frozen if those things were possible? So I don't think that there should be any top-down decision on that. What is a better life often comes down to agency and having choice. To add to the menu of choices, the ability to determine your own health and its sort of like health span is interesting, and it might be that the global community decides that's where resources go. I certainly think that like the private sector will attempt to pursue that capability because of the interest that would be there. But I would agree with you that ultimately it's the quality of that life. So if there were some decision point around extension versus quality increase, it seems like there's a lot to do. We're all very privileged in this room, but for the global majority, a lot of work to do to bring those people up to a better standard of living, and even for ourselves to make sure that we don't extract ourselves to extinction or come to a place of a challenging climate environment. So I would lean towards the quality, but I think it's an interesting question. I think we'll have to grapple with it more, especially as AI accelerates R&D and scientific exploration.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for allowing us to have such a wonderful conversation. As I mentioned, will be an opportunity to engage going forward in this dialogue and to how we collaborate with the Vatican, and hopefully we have a very diverse audience as part of that collaboration. And we look forward to taking that and going far beyond it, so that in next year and in years beyond, we continue to have some really, really interesting conversations, not just about the potential of AI, but how we've actually started to use AI to address some of the issues that we've raised here today. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you in particular our panelists, and have a wonderful evening.